This presentation will provide an overview of the characteristics of students with autism spectrum disorders. In this presentation, you will learn about the history of autism spectrum disorders, prevalence and causes of ASD, the current definition of ASD, characteristics of students with ASD, and best practices for teaching students with ASD. The word autism comes from the Greek word autos, meaning self. In 1911, a psychiatrist by the name of Eugen Bleuler coined the term autism and autistic to describe an aspect of schizophrenia in which a person withdraws from the outside world into himself. In 1943, Leo Kanner, who was a psychiatrist, used the term autistic in his publication describing 11 children with characteristics similar to how we define autism today. The 11 children that Leo Kanner studied had some common characteristics, including the inability to relate to others in an ordinary manner, an extreme aloneness, an apparent resistance to being picked up or held by parents, deficits in language, sometimes an excellent rote memory, early specific food preferences, extreme fear reactions to loud noises, obsessive desire for repetition and maintenance for sameness, few spontaneous activities such as a typical play behavior of other children, bizarre and repetitive physical movements such as spinning or rocking, and normal physical appearance. These aren't necessarily the characteristics that we use to define autism today, but many of these characteristics are seen in children with autism. In 1944, Hans Asperger, who was an Austrian pediatrician, used the term autistic to describe 4 boys with characteristics of what we refer to as Asperger syndrome today. Until the 1980s, Kanner's description of autism was the most widely recognized, not Asperger's description, meaning until 1980, we recognized autism, but we did not have a deep understanding of Asperger syndrome, which is different from autism, but still under the same umbrella, which we will discuss in a few minutes. In the late 1940s, Bruno Bettelheim coined the term refrigerator mothers, claiming that the cause of autism was unfeeling, cold parents. While Bettelheim was said to be a Hungarian psychotherapist, it was discovered in the later 1990s that before emigrating to the United States, he had worked in the family lumber business and earned a degree in art history with absolutely no expertise in autism. Unfortunately, though, his theory of refrigerator mothers was widely accepted for 2 decades, and it has taken quite an ordeal of undoing to inform the public that autism is not caused by mothers or parents who are cold. In 1964, a psychologist named Bernard Rimland published a book that insisted that autism was a biological disorder, not an emotional illness caused by unfeeling parents. Rimland was also a parent of a child with autism and the founder of the Autism Society of America, or ASA. ASA was the first parent-driven organization to provide information and support to parents and professionals. Today, they are the leading organization, and in addition to Autism Speaks, and you can view the ASA website by going to www.autism-society.org. In 1981, Lorna Wing published a paper using the term Asperger syndrome in which she described children much like the boys described by Hans Asperger in 1944. This is when the term Asperger syndrome began to be used in the United States. In 1980, autism was added to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual published by the American Psychiatric Association. In 1994, Asperger syndrome and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, or PDD-NOS, were also added to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Autism, Asperger syndrome, and PDD-NOS make up the autism spectrum disorders. Although there are differences among those 3 disorders, mainly Asperger syndrome involves students who have average or above average intelligence, can communicate using expressive language, however, have significant deficits in social skills and pragmatics, and also have stereotypic behaviors. Students with PDD and OS are similar to students with autism, however, they don't have as many characteristics of students with autism or to the severity of students with autism. With that said, in 2013, changes were made to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the DSM-5, which combines autism, Asperger's syndrome, and PDD-OS under one category, and that category is autism spectrum disorders. So we do not any longer make many differentiations between autism, Asperger's, and PDD-NOS. Instead, we define the levels of impairment that individuals have along this autism spectrum. In 1987, Ivar Lovaas published his landmark study showing dramatic IQ gains for a large number of young children with autism participating in an applied behavior analytic intervention called discrete child training. This work has paved the way for the use of intensive early intervention for children with autism. Finally, in 1990, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act recognized autism as one of the 13 disabilities under which a student can be eligible for special education services. The Center for Disease and Control reports that an average of 1 in 68 children have an autism spectrum disorder. Also, autism spectrum disorders are 4 to 5 times higher in boys than in girls. The causes of ASD are still unknown. However, it is likely that both genetics and the environment play a role in the causes of autism spectrum disorders. Autism spectrum disorders are neurologically based developmental disabilities with onset before the age of 3, and they are defined by marked impairments in communication, social interaction, and the presence of stereotype behavior, interests, and activities. As the presentation goes on, we will discuss all of these different characteristics, but I do want to point out here that neurologically based means that this is a brain-based disability, and that onset before the age of 3 means that children are born with autism spectrum disorders. It's not something that they develop because of a brain injury or other factors. The 3 main areas of impairment for children with autism spectrum disorders are impairments in communication, in social interaction, and the presence of stereotype behavior, interests, and activities. Each of these areas will be discussed next, as well as other characteristics that many individuals with ASD face. Students with ASD often have a variety of social interaction impairments. The main impairment that these children face is deficits in joint attention. And what joint attention means is the ability to share attention with another person or a group of people related to an object, an idea, an event, or an activity. It's that we're in it together kind of interaction. And children with autism often have deficits in that, or the people interacting with them have to work pretty hard to get that joint attention. Another deficit is poor social or emotional reciprocity, meaning once a child has joint attention with another person or a group of people, they often have difficulty engaging in long chains of back and forth interactions. That would be considered social or emotional reciprocity, that back and forth exchange that comes easy to people who do not have ASD. Students with ASD also have impairments in the use of nonverbal behaviors, such as eye contact, facial expressions, body posture, and social gestures. And for students with autism who are nonverbal, paired with these difficulties with nonverbal behaviors, it really limits their ability to communicate with other people. Children with autism often have difficulty establishing developmentally appropriate relationships with peers. While they can easily develop relationships with adults, developing relationships with peers is often difficult. And that is typically because adults use a variety of strategies to engage the children with autism, whereas peers don't naturally do that. So it's up to teachers to try and teach peers how to use strategies to maintain interactions with children with autism. And another characteristics related to social interaction is that children with autism often do not spontaneously seek opportunities to interact with other people. And that's typically because they don't know how to do so, not because they don't want to do so. In fact, a lot of times they do seek opportunities to interact with other people, but because they don't really know how to do that appropriately, they might do that using inappropriate behaviors. Students with autism may have deficits in receptive and expressive language. Receptive language is the ability to understand the language that others are using and be able to respond to that language to communicate. And expressive language is using words and other nonverbal language skills to express oneself. Students can have expressive language even if they're nonverbal if they're using augmentative and alternative communication supports. Many students with autism have stereotyped and repetitive use of language, meaning they may repeat phrases and sounds for the purpose of self-enjoyment, or they might use those repeated phrases to communicate because they don't know other ways to communicate, and so they might use a phrase that they've heard others saying to try and engage with other people. Some children with autism have difficulties with articulation, meaning producing words, and it might be difficult to understand what they're saying. And or they might have unusual prosody. That was typically common with students who have more significant impairments, but they might sound very robotic or nasally when they do speak. Children with autism often have a lack of developmentally appropriate spontaneous make-believe play or social imitative play, and this can really hinder their success with peers early on. They also will often have difficulties with conversational skills. They may learn to label things and request things and answer some basic questions, but when it comes to back and forth conversations, they often need quite a bit of intervention to be able to learn how to engage in conversations with others. Students with autism also will have difficulty understanding abstract language. So in the classroom, it's very important to understand this difficulty and provide many opportunities for students to learn information at the concrete level before moving on to abstract concepts. By definition, children with ASD will have some sort of repetitive or restricted stereotype patterns of behavior, activities, and interests. For example, students might have a preoccupation with one or more stereotyped and restricted patterns of interest that is abnormal, either in focus or intensity. In other words, they might have a really strong fascination or passion about one particular thing and spend a lot of time thinking about that passion and engaging in activities related to that passion, as opposed to being interested in a variety of different things, as most children aren't. Also under this category, children with autism might have difficulty with flexibility, and they might be inflexible when a routine is changed and they want to continue a ritual or the way some things are done. They might have non-functional routines where they have to do things a certain way or they get very upset. They also may have stereotyped or repetitive motor movements. This might be rocking or hand flapping or eye gazing in a certain way at different objects or through the light of a window. And children with autism might have preoccupation with parts of object as opposed to using objects for what they're intended. For example, a young child might pick up a toy car, and be preoccupied with the way that the wheels move as opposed to using the car to play as other children would play. To learn more about these three main areas of impairment, there is an excellent resource on the Autism Speaks website under Autism Video Glossary, and there's a link provided here. And you could go into Autism Speaks Autism Video Glossary and log in. It's free to log in, and there are many different video clips that you can view to see these different characteristics in children with autism. And what they will do on that website is they will show a child that doesn't have autism displaying the behaviors or characteristics that would be typical, and then to the right of that is a child with autism, and you can see